So at some point, you go from not just Christian, but really involved, professional Christian, as you put it, to now where you are. Where does this start?
So in my early 20s, the first couple of years out of school, I'm an engineer, civil engineer. I'm still very involved in Campus Crusade at the time. I'm not having that many, existential questions about it. If anything, I'm thinking about how I'm moving towards being a professional Christian, because my wife was still in college at the time. And so Link and I had kind of, we'd been best friends since first grade, 1984. So we kind of knew what we were working towards. And the idea that we were going to develop this ministry where we got to be funny and make our comedy videos. And we were really trying to find a way to do the thing that we loved for the cause that we loved.
So it sort of started as with God in the periphery here, of like with all the video stuff, and it's all sort of directed towards, at least subtly to some degree, evangelism.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it was a way to have my cake and eat it too, because I really wanted, like we are entertainers at heart. We wanted to be filmmakers. We wanted to make things that, had significance culturally. We wanted to do that from the very beginning. So we always had our minds of like, on this idea that maybe we'll kind of, we can use this ministry, or we can have a ministry where we're doing these things that we love, and then maybe something that we make will be impactful enough so that we could one day, maybe we'll move to Hollywood and maybe we'll have a ministry there just through the things that we create. That was sort of the thought in the early days. So shortly after the engineering stint, go on staff with Campus Crusade. At that point, you're going to the staff training and you're taking the seminary classes and your initial, and I was always I was not like a super deep student of theology, but I would say moderately deep. And there were certain ideas that I would gravitate towards and things that I like to think about and talk about. At that same time, I was given a book, and I never really thought about the intersection of science and faith. I think the way that I would have described it is, I think that most scientists are not Christians. Most scientists are atheists, and they've come up with some pretty wacky ideas to try to explain the world and why people are the way that they are, why the world is the way that it is. And they're mostly just desperate attempts to explain the world without God's involvement. So that whole thing about evolution and how long the world has been here, that's probably all BS, but I didn't think about it any more deeply than that. I wasn't like a staunch young earth creationist. I didn't think about that issue in particular, but I picked up a book from an astronomer, Hugh Ross, and I'm sure, I've mentioned this before, and he has a Christian ministry that is like very anti-evolution, but very pro old universe from the standpoint of astronomy, which, obviously when you look at all the astronomical evidence and the speed of light and the size of the universe and all this stuff, okay, the universe has been around for probably as long as the scientists are saying. But then he went on to essentially say that, but all truth is God's truth, and this is totally compatible with the Bible. But just so you know, evolution didn't happen. He was a proponent of something called progressive creationism, which essentially was, yes, the world has been around for as long as the scientists say.
Right.
And these fossils we find are legitimate fossils that are approximately the date that they're saying they are. But God was creating new batches of creatures, special creations at different stages throughout the history of the world.
Whoa.
And then ultimately resulting in the creation of people.
So why?
Great question. Great question. So I remember thinking as I'm reading this, I'm like, it's the first time I ever thought about there being some reconciliation between what we observe in science and my belief about the world. And I just remember thinking, this doesn't feel like a good explanation.
I've never heard of somebody. I mean, I'm sure I've met someone who probably like believes that the Earth is old and the universe is old, but maybe is suspicious of evolution. But specifically, like, Well, I'm a scientist and I'm an astronomer, and there's just no way I can look at the redshifting of the galaxies and deny that the universe is 13.8 billion years old. But that evolution stuff from that other field of biology that I probably never really seriously studied, yeah, no, that's all BS. And instead, I mean, God is just creating animals willy-nilly.
And there's animals that are getting more and more like a person before the people.
Yeah, it's like God is just sort of doing little trial runs or something.
Right. I mean, what does that say about God is what I was thinking.
Yeah, it gets there eventually. That is a little bit strange. I suppose it's kind of biblical in the sense of like stretching out the story of Genesis over however long you needed, and animals sort of popping in on different days and stuff like this. But yeah, I mean the biggest problem for me that evolution poses to the Christian, and a lot of Christians today just accept evolution. They're like, yeah, sure, humans all have a common ancestor with other animals. The biggest problem that I think it poses is the seeming like arbitrariness with which you have to say that, presuming that our apish ancestors don't get to inherit eternal life, at some point a mother gives birth to a child, and the child is morally condemnable to hell, but also potentially has the ability to inherit eternal life, but his mother doesn't.
Right.
And what the difference is there. And maybe it's just a brute fact. Maybe God just breathed life into that particular organism, but it just seems a bit arbitrary and unfair that person's suffering will now be redeemed and it now means something. But their mothers, who is the same organism, same suffering, same lifestyle, same everything, dies like an animal. It just doesn't seem right to me. Yeah. Unless you want to say that personhood is something which develops as well, but that gets you into a whole lot of trouble with
and so that's where I ended up going, right? Because when I didn't really buy into the progressive creationism thing, but I was so sure that evolution didn't happen. I was like, when you're raised in the Christian faith and the only exposure to the idea of evolution you've ever had has come through the filter of a Christian scientist telling you why it's not legitimate. Somebody comes into your church and they're like the evolution expert, and they're like, they make it seem so impossible that you walk out of that with the full affirmation of the idea that evolution definitely didn't happen. And it's a horrible explanation. It will be debunked by the scientists themselves within our lifetime. Like, that's the kind of stuff that we told ourselves, right?
Right.
And we firmly believed it. But because of this proposal, this progressive creationist idea, because the age of the universe and the age of the earth, from a geological, I've always been interested in geology, but from a geological standpoint, I was like, oh, well, this is inescapable. Like, this isn't, like, the way that Answers in Genesis has framed this issue is, I mean, I'm not going to say it's definitely disingenuous. I think they really just believe that it has to, be consistent with the Bible, and so they're just willing to just completely reshape everything that they're seeing in light of that. But I essentially was like, well, this doesn't make any sense. So then the idea of considering evolution, which just felt, I was like, am I actually about to do this? And I was like, well, I think C.S. Lewis believed in evolution. You start saying these things like, but there's a lot of Christians who are like theistic evolutionists. And okay, so maybe there's something to this. So I read Francis Collins' book, The Language of God. And the thing that I took away from that book was that, well, evolution happened as well. And he touches on it a little bit. He talks about, in that book, I think he talks about the second chromosome, the fusing of the second chromosome. I think he talks a little bit about retroviruses, and essentially, we've got the marks of the same retroviruses on our DNA that chimpanzees do. And there are just these, again, there's no other way to see it.
Just like inexplicable data.
Right. It's like if we're not related to every other animal on Earth, well, God certainly tried to make it seem like we are.
Yeah.
And so then that was a huge moment for me. I remember coming home, still living in North Carolina. Again, a lot of people think that the story that is often told is that Link and I were Christians. We came to Los Angeles. We were corrupted by this sinful city, and we threw away our faith. And the reality, and I've told it many times, but it's passed over, is that all this happened when I was in North Carolina.
Right.
This happened when I was completely buckled into the Bible Belt as tightly as you can be, surrounded by people who agree with me about all these things, with no social pressure to deviate from that at all. In fact, a lot of social pressure to stay in the fold.
Opposite.
So I was struggling a lot because I didn't have anybody to talk to about this.
Yeah.
I remember talking to Link. I talked to Link about it a little bit, and he would just kind of be like, "Oh, shit!" Like it felt like you're learning a lot of things that seem problematic, but I'm not going to I don't want to think about this.
Yeah.
Jessie, my wife, who did come from like a young Earth creationist background, like that's what she was taught growing up. When I came home and I was like, "We need to talk about something," and I said, I am thoroughly convinced that evolution is true and that we are related to every other animal. I believe in common ancestry. And I just think that it is not just, I sort of think it's true. It's just like my reading has led me to think that if this isn't true, then I actually can't determine what anything that's true. It's so overwhelming. Because I had read additionally to that. She just starts crying. Because she knew what this represented.
Right.
This was this seismic shift. And I think a lot of people that I tell this story to are like, what do you mean? But there's all these Christians that believe in evolution. Like, I can't believe that this was so significant for you. But I think the reason it was is because at that point, I realized how wrong I could be about something so fundamental.
Yeah.
And I never, ever considered that I might be wrong about something so fundamental. And then, not only was I wrong, but all of these Christian apologists who were so sure about their critiques of evolution, they had missed the boat so significantly on this that suddenly I was like, can I trust anything else they've got to say about this? So that was the first big domino.
Yeah. It's significant, like you say. I mean, you might think, well, there are Christians who believe in evolution, but it depends which way you come at it. I mean, if you're somebody who's like a scientifically minded person who comes to faith in Jesus, you're not going to abandon evolution, but you might think, okay, I can make this all work. But if you've come from the background you've come from, it's like going up to your wife and saying, I just think maybe we should like live in separate houses or something. And your wife starts bawling and someone says, hey, I don't really know. Some people do that. Some married couples, they live apart and stuff. It's like, yeah, but what it represents to move from where we are now and the way we were living to having this kind of question or this kind of desire indicates a direction of thought.
Yeah.
Which you don't really want to entertain. If you enjoyed that clip, you can watch the full conversation with Rhett McLaughlin by clicking the link that's on your screen. To support the show and get early ad-free access to episodes, subscribe to my Substack at alexoconnor.com. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.